Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about all of the different things that we've learned from this first part of the season, kind of getting into the back end of this season, and the biggest one is obviously officiating in this sport is broken. Is the best way that I can put it, and we need to fix it very, very soon, or there's going to be big time consequences and who makes the playoff and who doesn't. But we'll see what happens. Going to be some chaos, no two ways about that. But let's get to some winners and losers from this past weekend because I think there were a ton of kind of interesting ones. There's obviously the ones in the big time marquee games of the week. No two ways about that. But there are a lot of teams that kind of snuck under the radar, got big time wins that weren't necessarily celebrated the way that they normally would be if that Georgia Texas game, if that Alabama Tennessee game was not on the docket. But the first winner is the surprise undefeateds. They were able to stay alive this week in a week where it felt like I was getting a little nervous for a number of these teams. Indiana, I picked actually to fall to Nebraska this past week. One of the worst picks I had last week, no two ways about that. And then Army and Navy looked like games that they were going to be able to win, still ones that you feel like they could have struggled a little bit in, and they were able to just totally railroad those teams. So it was great to see Indiana. It was great to see Army and Navy kind of handle their business. For Indiana, the CFP door is wide open. I think a lot of people were waiting for that last shoe to drop. I think a lot of people were waiting for Indiana to become Indiana again. But this was the game that I think a lot of people circled for that to happen, and they just went to work. It was absolute domination, and I think it's one of those things that it's no longer, oh, it'd be cool if Indiana made a playoff run. It'd be awesome to watch. It really could happen, so it'd be awesome to watch it. No two ways about that. But it's no longer a hypothetical by any means. This is a team that I don't even want to say hypothetically, can absolutely win 11 games this year. So cannot wait to see that. And then for the service academies, it's all about Notre Dame. Can you win that game? If you can, then you're in incredibly good shape, and frankly, probably wildly the favorite from the G5 to get to the CFP. But if you lose those games, I feel pretty confident saying those two teams are probably out of the running with what Boise State and what UNLV are doing over there. Although one of those teams will be taken out of the running this Friday, and we'll get to that game tomorrow. But the loser is the SEC, and let me explain this here for a second because plenty of teams got big wins. Tennessee, LSU, a lot of teams are feeling okay about where they're at. I'm not arguing that. They did not want to see what they saw in Austin, Texas. I can promise you that. I think everyone in the SEC was willing to take a Texas close win. I think they would have been able to say, this isn't Georgia's best team. Texas is still not a team that's outright elite, and when they have to play a real game away from home in an SEC environment, they're going to fall. And then they saw Georgia just go to work. They saw Georgia be the Georgia of old and absolutely dominate Texas from tip to tail, and I think it's making everyone a little bit nervous. Now, they won't say that, and there's no two ways about that. There's no coach in the SEC that's going to admit that they're a little bit nervous about what they saw, but I promise you, the scariest thing in the SEC right now is a determined Kirby Smart. And if you saw him on Saturday, he was determined. It's going to be an absolute nightmare for the rest of these teams, and I think a lot of teams in the SEC felt a lot better about their chances at 7 p.m. on Saturday than they did at 10 p.m. on Saturday. I can almost promise you that. Winners with the D-line performances. And obviously, Georgia is going to take the cake here. They were absolutely all over Texas for most of that game, and I've talked about that a little bit. I don't think the offensive linemen for Texas were quite as bad as it seemed. I think there were a lot of structural issues with Texas that allowed for this defensive line to just dominate from start to finish. It was really, really incredible to watch, and that's not even remotely where it ended. Tennessee went to work, and frankly, this is not a new thing. It's something that, frankly, you're going to see every single week from Tennessee. This D-line is an absolute monster to deal with, one of the best, maybe the best unit in the entire country, and one of those teams that absolutely put them in a position to win an SEC title, because when you have guys up front like that, it's a nightmare to deal with. And then finally, the Illinois defensive line deserves a ton of respect. They harassed Jack Tuttle all game. The run game did not necessarily get going the way that Michigan needed it to get going. It was just true absolute domination, and Gabe Jacas was just all over the place in that game. So really remarkable stuff from the D linemen all across the country, but I think Jalen Walker and Michael Williams might just take the cake in this one. No two ways about that. And then we got losers. Quarterback play kind of goes hand in hand with the D-lines playing well. But at the end of the day, there were a number of players, and we'll focus on the two big games here because there wasn't really one quarterback in those two games that played very well. And the main thing was Quinn Ewers, 28 pressures in that one, and just he was taken down 6 times, and one other time was Arch Manning. So it was tough. No two ways about that. Did not play his best game. Was able to bounce back in the second half a little bit and got a little bit more comfortable. But at the end of the day, not his best day by any means. And then Jalen Milroe, one of the worst games that I've seen him play. I'll be totally honest. He was missing wide open receivers, did not get his legs involved in. I do think he's a little bit dinged up. I don't know what the injury is, but the reality is, if you're Alabama right now, I think an 80%, 70% Jalen Milroe is probably better than whatever else you have on the roster. And that might hurt to hear, but that's kind of the reality of that situation right now. You need his legs. You need his ability to keep defenses honest. And right now it's just not necessarily where you want it to be. And then on the winning side of those two games, you had Carson Beck, far from perfect, and then Nico Iamaleava, who was able to turn it on in the second half, but missed a lot of the throws that we have become weirdly accustomed to him missing over the last couple of weeks. But at the end of the day, those two quarterbacks, Beck and Iamaleava, are far from worried about that because they got the win, and that's what matters. Winner was head coach hopefuls. They got a little bit of an opening this past weekend, and I tend to believe those are going to start flowing in over the next couple of weeks, so we'll keep you updated on that front. But the big news coming out of this one was Mike Houston, the head coach of ECU, was fired after that loss to Army. Had not been a great team this year, had been kind of up and down, just all over the place, and this was one that probably had to happen. He had a losing record while at ECU, and now they got to move forward and figure out where they have, and the big-time name has been Joe Sloan, the offensive coordinator over at LSU. Very talented young coach doing incredible things with Garrett Nussmeier, and was a huge piece of what Jaden Daniels did last year, although Mike Denbrock was the offensive coordinator that year. So there's a lot of really, really talented guys out there. This might be one of the top ones. He's really, really incredible. I think he's fully ready to take that next step. He's flirted with opportunities in the past, but this is one that I think is a little bit more enticing than some of the others. And then kind of a dark horse candidate. There's one that I'm not necessarily sure if ECU is looking that direction, but wouldn't be surprised if they were, is Buster Faulkner, the offensive coordinator for Georgia Tech. He did an incredible job last year, was one of the best offense, I believe the best offense in the ACC last year, and has done a great job this year under not great circumstances with Haynes King getting injured and things of that nature. But he was offered the Middle Tennessee State job last year, didn't end up taking it, and this could be another job that is very much after him. So a couple of guys to watch there. Joe Sloan is the one that I would really watch, but just don't be surprised, I suppose, if Buster Faulkner comes across your Twitter page as being considered for this job. The loser is officiating crews around the country, and I am not talking about the one that was in Austin this past weekend, because they deserve to lose. I'll put it that way. I don't want them around a big-time game the rest of the season and maybe the rest of their careers, but that's totally beside the point. The officiating in that game was absolutely atrocious, pretty much from start to finish, but particularly this very moment. You absolutely cannot do what they did, just plain and simple. I don't even care if the guy comes into the huddle and says, I got the call wrong. It doesn't matter. At that point, once the fans start throwing bottles, they have lost that call. Period. End of story. Because you've just created a situation where every single crew across the entire country has to meet to figure out how they're going to handle this. They have to meet to figure out how they're going to handle fans throwing bottles on the field and how they're going to handle, reviewing certain plays. You're making other ref crews do more work than they have to do because one ref crew just didn't do their job. And that is absolutely terrible. So it's all over the place. We talked about officiating earlier. I think officiating crews in general are just being kind of just made an example of, kind of a scapegoat in all of this because they're making bad calls. I'm not taking pressure off them. The entire system's broken, and they're just trying to officiate to the best of their ability. So I'm not necessarily attacking the officials by any means, but what I am saying is that officiating crew in Austin, Texas created a new slate of jobs for every other officiating crew, and it's just really, really unfair more than anything else. But the loser was the winners were the Coach of the Year candidates because there were a number of big-time wins this past weekend. I do want to give love to Mario Cristobal, Mike Elko, Brett Bielema. They've done incredible things and got some wins this past weekend, so definitely deserve some love there. But there are two names that really stand out, and we'll start with Deion Sanders. he has totally changed that Colorado program. Whether you want to talk about the talent level of there, the coaching staff, the fan experience is totally different and really remarkable. There's so many different things that he's done incredibly well, and one of the big time things that I've been watching for is not necessarily this year, because although this year has been absolutely remarkable and they're answering a ton of the questions that I had going into the year, 2025 is the year, right? When you have Shadur leaving, when you have Travis leaving, when you have a lot of these guys that you transferred in leaving, how can they reset? And that'll be a really, really interesting thing to watch. But as of this year, I think Deion Sanders very much has to be at the very top of the conversation for Coach of the Year. I just think he's a touch behind Curt Cignetti. What Curt Cignetti is doing up there at Indiana is just remarkable. It's one of those things that you bring in a lot of talented guys. No two ways about that. They did come a lot from the G5 ranks. So it's not like you were influxing a ton of like Alabama, Miami, like elite players. You were getting guys that were just driven by will more than anything else. And they have played incredibly, incredibly well this year. And frankly, I can't find a coach in the country that has done a better job from the start of his job to now than Curt Cignetti has. It's been absolutely remarkable to watch, and I don't think it's stopping anytime soon. That's really, really fun. And then the loser is the Alabama of old. I think we could all feel it on Saturday. This is not the same Alabama. And I don't want to say that's, entirely a bad thing. I think there is a number of things that could have changed over the last little bit. And frankly, a lot of this started when Nick Saban was in that chair. I don't want to put all of the blame on Kalen DeBoer, because this is not his Bama team yet. Because when he came into that program, a lot of stuff was happening. You had the greatest of all time walking out the door. You had about 40 guys that were looking to transfer or had already transferred. He had to be a little bit kinder. He had to be a little bit nicer. He had to be a little bit more accommodating, and it's created a little bit complacency in that program, and you can see it on the field. I mean, we all saw Ryan Williams, and I'm not sure who else it was, maybe Jeremy Bernard, hit a step back while they were getting stuffed on fourth down. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen when Nick Saban is in the chair. That's just the reality of the situation, and I'm not blaming Kalen DeBoer. I think he's going to be very successful at Alabama. I really do. I don't think he's the wrong guy for the job. I don't think we've even gotten close to figuring out if he's the right or wrong guy for the job. All that being said, this is a team that lacks mental toughness in a way that SEC teams just can't. They badly need that mental toughness. They badly need the physical toughness that Alabama's lacking a little bit right now. So there's a lot of things that are different about that team. I tend to believe that when we come back here next year and we're talking about this Alabama team, they're going to look a lot different. Not just from a personnel standpoint, but just from a energy standpoint, from a focus standpoint. I think they're going to be a ton different team, because I think the circumstances around this are going to be a ton different, which is a huge win for Kalen DeBoer. But no doubt about it, the Alabama of old is probably officially gone, and they're just going to have to figure out their way through the rest of the season, and then I think they'll be able to reset and be more than fine. But it's a very, very jarring thing to see Alabama at 5-2 and Vanderbilt at 5-2 as well. And Vanderbilt should be ranked over Alabama. Totally different conversation, but I just wanted to get that out there. But let's take our second break here. And when we come back, we got to talk about superlatives coming out of this weekend. We'll give out the biggest win of the weekend, individual performance of the week, statement of the week, loser of the week, and everything else right after this. So stick with us.